Okay, good morning, everyone. So welcome to the RS Distinguished Lecture. Today we are lucky to have Professor Jean-Marie Tarascon with us, talking about the lithium and the sodium-based electrodes. So this winter, we are very lucky to have a few very renowned scientists on battery field. So last week we had Professor Karami from Argonne, and this week we have Professor Jean-Marie Tarascon. And in the beginning of January, we also have a workshop, so we have like about 10 scientists working on the battery field to give lectures. So Professor Jean-Marie Tarascon, I believe everyone knows his name. If you don't, then I can easily tell that you are not working on the battery field. But Professor Tarascon is not only working on the battery, but also working on other materials, like superconductors, fluoride glasses, and other material for new solid-state electronic devices. He was our former RS Senior Visiting Fellow and got the PhD in solid-state chemistry from the University of Bordeaux in 1981. And then he moved to industry, joined the Bayer Communication Research in 1983, and then moved to academia, University of Pickdale, Jules Verne in 1995. And in 2010, he moved to the current university in Collège de France. And currently is a professor of chemistry of material and energy, and also director of the research network on electrochemical energy storage. So Professor Tarascon has published a lot of papers, and I count it's close to 600 now, and also hold about 70 patents. I just checked the citation this morning, and from Google Scholar, it's about 110,000, and with the H index of 137. So you can image the impact of his research. Due to his outstanding achievements in research, he has received numbers of awards, including the Centenary Prize by the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Pierre Sur Prize by the French Chemical Society, the Ellie Award for Environmental Protection, and a gold medal by University of Piccadilly Jules Verne, and the water medal by the Electrochemical Society. So without further ado, so let's welcome Professor Tarascon to give us the lecture.
I am a pleasure to be here, and of course I came here for a very short time to assist to the defense of one of my co-chair students. And today what I am going to do is a little to tell you about this kind of ionic redox processes and dealing with lithium ion and sodium ion. So I will try to make this lecture, I will say, very pedagogical, and hopefully at the end of the lecture all of you can tell I understand what ionic redox is. So let me first start, of course, why do we work on these fields? As you know, the field of energy storage is, or energy in general, is ranked number one among the 10 more important issues in our planet. And we need to double our energy production by 2050, means going from 14 to 18 terawatt. So to do this, definitively, we have some great hope by using renewable energies, as clearly indicated here, means energy coming from the wind, solar, and so on. But in order to succeed in this kind of energetic transition, you are obliged really to know how to produce, transport, convert, and store better the energy. So, of course, today I will really focus on the energy storage. And when you are dealing with energy storage, here is another greater challenge, because you want to be able to design better devices in order to facilitate the use of renewable energy as well as the use of EV transportations. So in order for this most application, you need to have energy on board, and the best way to do this is to convert chemical energy into electrical energy, since both of these energy have the same carrier, that is the electron. And of course, the technology that enables you to do this is the battery. And if you look at different types of batteries, if you classify them in terms of energy density, watt-hour per kilogram and watt-hour per liter, you can see that you have a lead-acid nickel cadmium and the lithium type systems, where I would say the lithium-ion technology I certainly be one of the greatest discoveries over the 20th century. So of course today we are going to talk about this lithium-ion technology. So in this transparency I'm going to give you all the basics that you need to know about lithium-ion. This technology is based, as you can see, on two electrodes that are immersed in aqueous electrolyte, with a specificity that these two electrodes, as you can see here, are kind of compounds that contain vacancies and which lithium can go in and out. So when you are daily making this type of devices, what you do, you generally collect the voltage as a function of capacity, and you obtain these kind of curves are clearly indicated here. So what is very important out of this curve is the surface area below this discharge curve that is giving you the energy density. And such energy density is simply related to the potential of the cell, the output of the cell, multiplied by the capacity. And I think it's a simple relation that you really need to do in order to work on this field. Then, if you look at the voltage, it's going to be depending on the band structure of the materials, which means where the electrons have to go when you take lithium in and out. And of course, I will go back very heavily on this band structure later on in my presentation. Then the capacity is of course depending on the crystal structure, which means the number of vacancies that you have on these, either on this positive or negative electrode. And the capacity, the relation is given by this equation here, where X is finally the number of electrons or number of vacancies that you have in this compound, and M is the molar mass. So in order to increase the capacity, as you can see here, you are obliged or you want to increase X and lower M and so on. Also very important when you compare different technology is to take into consideration what I will call the energy efficiency, which means that it's going to be the difference between the charge and discharge curve. And a great advantage of the lithium-ion battery is that you can get energy efficiency approaching 99% compared to 75% now for lithium air and so on. But all this stuff is simple, but the most important things out of all of these is that these batteries are not made a single electrode, but the electrodes are type of composites, in which you have the active materials, the binder, the electronic conductor, and so on. Whatever, you try to count the number of interfaces into these systems, you have at least 15 chemical interfaces. And when you know that interface is kind of nightmare to master for electrochemists, you can understand why we have great difficulties in turning this device into applications. So this is more or less what is all about the lithium-ion batteries. So now, when you do research on batteries, you should not come here with a simple expertise, but is multidisciplinary field that relied on materials, interface, and systems. And of course, here we have huge amount of opportunities because we have all type of chemistry. You need to know about organic and polymer chemistry. You will see it with the presentations. Of course, you need to master, so we say chemistry, but also what is very important is clearly, in this case, to go against surface science. And of course, electrochemistry is quite important, and in-situ reaction techniques, and I certainly here forget modeling and so on. And what I would like to show you through this talk is how it is very important, at least I like it, to do fundamental scientific research out of concrete technological problems. And you will see more or less how this can lead both to practical devices as well as new discoveries. So if I look at this type of system, of course today, I will really focus on materials. And if I focus on materials, when I look at the electrodes, I will clearly say that the electrode is a sum of several factors, which are the material composition, material texture, material surface functionalization, or nanostructuration. And here, I think you need to be able to design new materials. And of course, the design of new phase is quite important. And as you can see here, what we are using when we are trying to look for new phase, we go back to minerals. because the minerals are really the Bible of inspiration to get new structure. And usually we found this type of compound and try really to implement them with kind of 3D methods to get interesting materials. Second point is now to play with a type of chemistry, more or less type of solution chemistry, in order to nanostructure your electrode, as you can see here, or doing this kind of core shell structure and so on. And finally, what is quite important is also in order to control, to master the interface electrode-electrolyte is, in this case, to be able to do some grafting on the surface to delete parasitic reaction and so on. So of course today, what I want to show you is how we can play with some of this game to design two new materials. And through this presentation, I will have only two examples. The first example is going to be related to some recent material advance dealing with lithium-ion technology. And of course, I will tell you quite a lot about the ionic redox, the history of the ionic redox, and you're going to see that it is not new. It has been around for quite a while, but people neglect it. Then I will show you what are the paradigm shifts associated to this new concept. And finally, I will be critical at the end of it by telling you more or less what are the changes that this material will make into the market. Then I will move to the sodium-ion technology, follow to a certain extent the same kind of, I will say, demonstration, where I will first show you how important chemistry is, showing you now how we went from the material to prototypes, and finally to show you some of the recent research not yet published, and which we were able to design some new electrolytes. So let's first talk with the lithium-ion technology. When you look at this technology nowadays, of course, the capacity or the energy density is coming from the positive electrode. So you have really, in this case, two types of positive electrode. You have the positive electrode that we call polyanion compound, and which in this case an oxide is replaced by this polyanion. And here we have been working quite a lot for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years on these materials. And as you can see here, we come out with certainly about 10, 12 new phases. But today, I won't talk about this stuff, but I will focus on this type of layer materials. Why I will focus on the materials? Number one, they are certainly the ones that you want to know about it, because these are the ones that you are using in your laptop and so on. And I will show you how, even though these materials are well known, what we were been able to achieve into this class of material. So let's start by this layer oxide. So this is more or less a type of layer oxide that all of you know, which is the lithium CO2, this layer structure, and which you have the metal layers there, and remember, these yellow atoms will be the lithium. Very simple compound. In order to turn your appetite, you nearly have the structure, you can see, is what we call in French the millefeuille, where the yellow cream are the lithium. And you squeeze, cream is going out, and so on. So this is the material that you are using in your laptop, and as you can see here, you can nearly charge these materials, and you obtain 4.2, and you get what? 150 milliampere per hour. But unfortunately, you can see, we cannot remove more than 0.5 lithium. And there is a main limitation who come from the fact that if you try to remove more, the structure breaks down and the layer fall apart. So through the years, chemists have tried really to improve this stuff via chemistry. And what happened, in order to understand these materials, is really to look at what is the reactive mechanism. And what you are looking at is a question, can we remove more than 0.5 lithium per cobalt metal? And this was a big dilemma for about several years, where theorists were telling us, you won't be able to do it and so on. Anyway, if you do by electrochemical reaction using nearly bromine or NO2BF4 as oxidative agent, we were never able really to remove all the lithium from the structure. But when we come out with this technology, this plastic technology, we could now be able to go to about 5 volts. And when we do this, we were now able to remove all the lithium from the structure, as you can see here, and move from a a normal R-3m structure through a CDI2 structure. And now the question is, what happened into this structure? If you do a simple calculation, CO2, you realize that CO theoretically should be at the first plus oxidation state. But when we are doing magnetic measurements, we could never obtain this. So, at the time, back to 1999, we proposed this model, and which in this case, we say that the ionic network should play a role here. And we should start to get electrons out of this band. So this was in 1999, and remember, when we tried to publish this paper, it was completely trashed by the referees because really it was not on the time of what we are thinking. Which was strange, because finally, what we are proposing were not out of the community, since, for instance, we are coming from the ITC superconductor, where in this case, the holes on oxygen were well accepted, well known, and also, if you look at the literature, we have a French chemist by the name of Jean Rouxel, which in the 1980s was, in this case, proposing all this kind of redox chemistry with the chalcogenides. And you have here what he proposed, and he has been studying this stuff for more than 10 years. So anyway, it took about 10-15 years before we are going to come back to this issue. So, following the progress on this higher compound, people have daily used now some substitution within the cobalt layer. And this replacement has led to this type of phase in which now you replace cobalt by nickel and manganese within the metal layer. And you can see when you do this, we move from 150 mAh to about 190 to about 200 mAh. But again, the message here is whatever you are doing, you are still limited to the number of electrons that you exchange per metal. You can remove solely one lithium. So the question was, can you go behind one lithium? Again, different teams, namely Jeff Dunn and Matt Thackeray, continue to do some substitution, and now they not only replace cobalt, nickel, manganese within the metal layer, but look, they put down this yellow atom. And now you have what we call this lithium excess and this lithium rich NMC phase. And this starts the study. When you look at this compound, why people are excited about it? Because I will say you have good news and bad news. The good news, which is not there, is that you can really increase the capacity. Since in this case you can see now that we have capacity reaching about 250, 270 instead of 190 as you had before. But the bad news, which indicates here, is that during cycling, the voltage continuously fades. So the question was, what is the science behind all these phenomena? What is the origin of the capacity? What is the origin of the voltage fade? These are the type of questions that we need to answer. So we have been working on this field, and we try to attack the problem differently. Indeed, here it's quite difficult because when you work with nickel, cobalt, and manganese, you have three different redox centers. And it's very difficult to control which one is going to be active. So we decide to move from 20 to 40 compounds and use instead of nickel, cobalt, manganese, ruthenium. And we prepare this type of compounds where now we have a single cationic center, which is a ruthenium. And when you look at the properties of the materials, which by the way maintain the same layer structure, we found, as you can see here, the same type of cascade curve on charge, and then this S curve on discharge. When you look at the voltage fade, what was very pleasantly observed is now, by doing this kind of chemical trick, we were able to not completely remove the voltage fade, but at least to partially solve this voltage fade. So in this case, finally, we design a new materials with a single cationic redox, which enable us to understand the basic phenomena. So to do this, we really have done several types of measurements on the samples that were either charged or discharged. And here you can see a charged sample. And we are going to observe this by XPS, which means by XPS, you are looking nearly at the binding energy of the electron. And we look at the 1s core spectra, and you can see that we have the classical peak O2 minus associated to the crystal oxygen. And then, beside all the deposit species, you have the appearance of this reddish peak, which you can see here, its binding energy is shifted toward higher value, which means that the charge on the oxygen is lessly electronegative. So in this case, which means that we have suddenly kind of peroxo-like species. And to confirm this stuff, we have done electron parametric resonance, where we could observe very nicely the signal associated to this peroxo-like species. So from this, it was really the first evidence, as indicated here, of the presence of this anionic redox activity and this lithium-rich layer oxide. Now the question, of course, is how these two types of species are going to be acting each other. What is the synergy between these two types of species? So in order to answer this question, what we have done, we have designed some kind of in situ electron parametric resonance, means that we design a totally new cell, which dimensions are relatively small, 5 mm, and then we mount the cell inside and we cycle. And you can see we start with the featureless spectra, then the ruthenium plus 5 is appearing, as clearly indicated there. If you follow the charge, you can see that the peaks disappear to the expense of another one, which here is directly related to this peroxo-like species. And of course, the process is reversible. When you go down on the charge, the peak associated to the peroxo-like species disappear to the expense of the ruthenium plus 5 peak, which again disappear to come back to ruthenium plus 4 and the final material. And you can see here, we have clearly shown that the exacerbate capacity into this compound is due to the cumulative cationic and anionic redox species. So now the question is, or was, how these species, what is the kinetics, how they appear, how they disappear. And what we have done here, we pursue the study a little further, and we have developed the first type of EPR imaging. So which means now, we are going to look within the electrode where these different species nucleated. So you can see here the same type of cells, and you can see, in this case, an imaging of the cell, where you can see the separator between the positive and negative electrode. And here I put a color bar to indicate the range of spin, blue, low, red, medium, green, medium, and red, high density. Now you look at the compound when we are at this potential at 4 volts, you can see that both electrodes are green, associated on one side to the spin of lithium plating, while on the other side you have the ruthenium plus 4. Now, if I increase the potential, you can see I have still the spin at the negative electrode with some greenish part, which high density indicates that some lithium is agglomerated. But look here, I have a disappearance of the spin at the positive electrode, which is consistent to the fact that we are at the transition from ruthenium plus 5 to a peroxo species. If I follow up the charge to the complete charge, you can see again some more accumulation of lithium at the negative electrode. But now, look, the positive electrode become greener because you have now more spin associated to directly this oxygen peroxo species. But what is very interesting, if you compare air and air, you can see here that I have homogeneity of the spin, while air, it is inhomogeneous. And this is going to give you a very important information, which means, and we will be back on this issue, that the kinetics associated to this anionic redox species are very sluggish. And this will have a great importance. So having determined this type of species, the next step was, in this case, can we observe this species? So we look at it by microscopy, and what we found when we look at our compound here, you can see the nice structure, you can see nicely the layer compound with the two here white spots associated to the heavy atoms within the metal layers. And then when you go to very high voltages, charge, you can see there are a huge amount of disorder with cations moving from the metal plane to the van der Waals gap and so on. So there is no way that you can observe some cranial feature or some kind of distance into these materials. So if there is this motion, chemically now we want really to stop this cation to move, and we need to increase the covalency of our lattice. And to do so, we need to play with chemistry and replace ruthenium by a 5D metal which is more covalent. And this is more or less what we have done, and we prepare this kind of compound, lithium-2-IRO3, where now, you can see here, we have a kind of cascade curve, and we remain into this cascade upon charge and discharge. And if we look now by microscopy, what we find, by ion emission, we can see here, we found that indeed, by putting iridium into this compound, I don't have any more migration. You can see I don't have any more atoms between these two layers. Then, when you look at high angular dark field image, we nicely see the honeycomb associated to these iridium atoms. And then, when you go to the angular bright field image, in this case, you can see the nice contrast, and you can distinguish this kind of distorted IR06 octahedron and this kind of dimer corresponding to this peroxolate species. And this was directly the first direct relation of these oxygen-oxygen dimers. So these are type of model compounds, and of course the community didn't want to accept this in terms of the classical lithium-rich NMC. But recently we have pursued this, and I think we provide the demonstration that this phenomena, the mechanism, is identical even in lithium-rich. What we are looking here is ART-XPS, which means that you have our sample with a particle about 100 nanometer, and now we are going to look by the ART-XPS, which means that we have particles, and we are going to increase our intensity. By increasing intensity, we are going really to probe deeper and deeper the particles. And we can go with 6.9 kilo electron volt to about 30 nanometer. So means that there we sense the bulk of the particles. And now if we look at our SPX spectra, remember what I showed you before, you can see here the peak associated to the peroxoblack species, which is present. And of course, you can see here that by doing with this very high intensity, we get rid of the effect of the surface, because of course we go deeper into the material, and the proportion of the surface becomes smaller. And this is really perfectly reversible. So I think by now, and there is some more data coming in the literature, that we have direct evidence that even a lithium-rich NMC, we have a bulk ionic redox. So this is to conclude this story about what the paradigm occurs. Indeed, this is a way, for instance, that lithium-ion or cathode materials have been nearly considered for 35 years. Means that when you remove lithium, as you can see here, only the cations are acting as a redox couple. Now, what I show you, that now, if you look at these new materials, now when you remove lithium, look, the cation and then the ionic network does participate to the process. And the advantage of all of this is, of course, that we can double the capacity going from 150 to 280. So this is more or less what the paradigm we come out with. Now, of course, we need to do some science. And why this do happen? What is the reason? So here I am going to go to kind of basic physics. Because if I want to understand the electrochemical property of a compound, I need really to determine its electronic properties, which are a function of the composition and of the structure of the materials. And into these materials, as you can see, all the structures of the oxide are built of MO6 octahedron. So I am going to go to establish the classical bond structure that all of you know, you have learned this stuff. In order, I have to consider these metal-oxygen bonds, which can be formed by really a molecular orbital overlap of the d metal and the p metal to give you the different discrete levels. Now, of course, when you go to a solid, you go from discrete to a band structure. And this is more or less the type of band structure that we are going to deal with, where now you can see this molecular orbital MO and this one anti-bonding. And of course, everything is going to be focusing on this, where of course the distance between these two bands are what I will call the charge transfer, which is proportional to the electronegativity of the metal and of oxygen. And now, from now on, I am going to focus on this. If I look at the issues, I am going to distinguish several places. Now, the question is, why oxygen is active in these materials? And to tell you this, or to convince you of why, I need to go back to the structure and explain you the structure and very simple details. This is a layer compound that we have been dealing, and this is more or less the structure of lithium cobalt oxide. And you look here, the layers, you have in this case oxygen, and red, and then blue the ingredient. And now we are going to consider the oxygen. The oxygen, you know, all of you, that in Lewis configuration, you have different of 3 2p doublets and 1 s doublet. Now you look at the structure, look, all the oxygen has its doublet participating to the bonding, which means that there is a nice overlap with the d metals. So we get in this case the classical bond structure when you have the molecular orbital with the bonding and non-bonding character. Now let's see what happens when I move from this lithium MO2 to the lithium-rich compound, lithium 2MO3. Now you see, now if I look nearly my layers I mentioned to you, I turn by 90 degrees, I have this kind of honeycomb where I have now one lithium that is surrounded by the different iridium or whatever atoms. And now, if you look at the oxygen here, you see the oxygen between lithium doesn't have any longer its doublet and bond the bonding. So, in this case, I have the same type of structure where now I have this kind of non-bonding associated to the oxygen. And of course, this non-bonding is going to be just a band and thermal energy of the molecular orbital here. So this is a picture. But with this picture, I am not yet satisfied about the position of my band. Because for people doing physics, they know that there is another term that is very important, that is electron-electron repulsion between the electron within the d orbitals, which means the Coulomb repulsion, or the famous U term that people know about it and lead to the Hubbard mode transition. And this term, U, now is going to compete with the charge transfer. And this is going to give me several situations that I have to consider. And indeed, if I look at this case, I can have three different situations to explain all my electrochemistry. First, if I am in the case of classical mode Hubbard, where U is quite smaller than delta, I have this configuration here. This is a classical case of cationic redox, where I will remove one electron from our anti-bonding state. Now, what happens if I go nearly to the opposite, where I will go nearly to delta, which is quite lower than U, which means in this case we are in a charge transfer regime. You can see here that now the lower Hubbard band is below my non-bonding state. So in this case, what I am doing, I am just removing electron from the non-bonding state. I am in the case of anionic redox. And of course, in this case, since the chemical hardness of oxygen is very strong, automatically, when I'm going to move too many electrons, create this kind of, I will say, peroxolate species, which will be unstable, and the oxygen will try to be liberated from the lattice and to give these oxygen gases. And this is what I will call a partial irreversibility. And this, we can figure out what is happening and how the stability is going to change as function of the d metal. And this was done by DFT calculation, where people have calculated the stability of the delta H associated to the reaction, which consider to the liberation of oxygen. And as you can see, when I take lithium-2 MO3, I will say in this case, all these materials are stable. Now, if I start to remove lithium, you are going to see what happens. Look, as soon as I start to remove lithium, look at the 3D metals. And here, we already start to have the release of oxygen. If I want to remove more lithium, it's even worse. And only the 4D or 5D metals are able to sustain the stability. So I will say here, this is only the bad news with respect to application and why we have so much trouble in order really to stabilize these lithium-rich NMC, which are nearly based on 3D metals. So you can see here, there is always small amount of oxygen release during the first reaction process. Now, let's look to the most interesting case, in which now the term U is, or the term delta, is nearly U over 2. And in this case, you can see we have both at the Fermi level this non-bonding state plus this MO, molecular orbital antibonding, which means that we have two orbitals at the Fermi level, which means in this case this is a very unstable situation, and you are going to leave the degeneracy by creating a distortion, what we have been observing into this compound. And here we are in the case, we have nearly the ionic redox with two bonds, and we have this extra capacity. So I hope that you understand what is the origin of this ionic redox. So now, having this, of course, you can nearly, by yourself, tell me which direction should I go if I want to increase the capacity using ionic redox. Remember, I'm telling you that you have oxygen with 3 doublets. I was able, by moving to lithium-2 MnO3, in this case, as you can see here, to remove one. And if I want more capacity, let's get more non-bonding oxygen. So I need to design a structure in which now I will have nearly a single involved nearly 2p state and 2p non-bonding. And of course, if you want to design this compound, you need to synthesize the phase lithium-3 MO4. This phase was not existing, and we were able to synthesize and prepare the materials lithium-3 IO4 as clearly indicated here. And you can see that we indeed obtain a layer structure and so on. And when we look then at the electrochemical properties of the materials, as shown in the next slide, we nearly measure the electrochemical properties using this type of cells, where at the same time we can not only count the number of lithium, but also measure the amount of oxygen that is released. And when we did the measurements, when we are charging the red curve, we found that behind or below x equal 1, we have nearly a release of oxygen. Then we stop our experiment at x equal 1, and we try to cycle the cell back and forth. And here, we were able to cycle the cell back and forth, and as you can see, about 3.5 electrons per 3D metal. And this is the largest capacity that has ever been observed in insertion compound, as indicated here. And you can see this is really related to first the redox on the iridium, and here again the ionic redox activity. So this, of course, clearly indicates, as I mentioned to you, that there is a trade-off between extra capacity and, of course, removal of oxygen. And of course, the game in the field now is how can we get as much capacity without triggering this oxygen release, and this is the type of game that we are doing. So if you look at all of this, so far, I was telling you about materials that are layer compounds. So the question that you may ask is this new effect is only specific to layer compounds? So again, we try to answer this question, and as a matter of fact, we were not the first to answer this question, because Yabuchi has been trying to play this game, where he tried to move to this type of structure by nearly creating the oxo layer type structure, where by increasing, I will say, the ratio lithium over M, he was able to obtain this disordered oxo structure that you can see here, disorder, because look here, you have nearly layers with, and now you have a huge amount of intersite mixing. And when you was doing this stuff, he was able to get kind of nice compound, as clearly indicated here, but again, the kinetics was very poor, since he was obliged to go to 50 degrees C to prepare these materials. So the question was, can you make a well-ordered 3D structure? So these are more or less the targets that we tried to achieve, and we succeeded by ideally going back to our classical lithium-iridium compound. This is a phase that I already mentioned to you, remember? This lithium-2 IRO3 phase that you prepare nearly under these conditions. And here you have this kind of lithium layers and these metal layers, and when you do synthesis, what is happening? You are packing the layer on top of each other to get the 2D structure. And what we found is by simply changing the temperature, going to slightly higher temperature, 100 degrees C higher, you are going to see that we are going to have a stacking totally different. Indeed, in this case, we are really to mix these different type of layers and finally pack two identical layers. And when we do so, as you can see here, look, now we are creating a 3D structure. And within this 3D structure, you can see now the lithium being in this channel and so on. So the question is, does this phase will uptake or release lithium? The answer is here. Now you can see, we start at 2, and now this time, we are able to remove all the lithium. Why? Because we have a three-dimensional structure, very rigid framework, and when you remove lithium, you don't have any more gliding and so on, and this compound is very nicely reversible, and you remove 2 electrons per radium. Now, is it a process that involves ionic redox? Of course, yes. When you look daily by XPS, you see the characteristic peak associated to ionic redox. And when we look by neutron, you see the distortion of the octahedra, remember, that I mentioned to you. So this, again, is a very clear indication that ionic redox can also exist with 3D compounds. And this opens considerably the field for looking for these materials, since you know that with oxide, you have a huge amount of 3D oxide. And indeed, doing this type of work, we totally open, I will say, the highway, where now we can play with structural dimensionality, we can play with lithium M composition, and you can see more or less all the type of phase that can be synthesized. Of course, remember, I told you that if you want to be too gritty, we can get large capacity, but we have oxygen release. Here, nothing is happening. And of course, if we go here with very high lithium M composition, you fall into the regime of solubility and so on. So you want to stay around there in order to prepare these new materials. So this is more or less what you can do with lithium compounds. Now, can you use these materials for other application, and can you do something else? And the answer is yes, because we also try to play with supercapacitor. And what we found, again, based on chemistry, that we can take these materials and we can do this kind of ion exchange. And you exchange lithium by proton, and we obtain this type of new phase, H3 IRO4. And when we do this, we move from this O3 type structure to a P3 type structure, and you are going to see this type of protonized structure is showing also quite interesting behavior with respect to uptake of release of lithium, either in organic electrolyte or what is new, an aqueous electrolyte, which means that now we are talking about the protonic aqueous systems. Indeed, if you look now at the non-aqueous electrolyte, you have here the voltage composition curve with the derivative, and which you have a phase change as indicated here. Now you look at aqueous media, where in this case you are looking at protons, which are quite faster than lithium. You expect to have, of course, a faster rate. And indeed, look what we obtain in the case of proton. We don't have any longer any polarization. So it means here you have energy efficiency of 99%. And if you look daily at the derivative curve, as you can see here, we have a nice derivative curve, and we are able here to get what 5,000 cycles. But of course, what's interesting here is looking at the rate capability. And this is more or less the capacity versus the C rate. with the lithium system. And when we move to proton, you can see we have a huge increase in power rate, and we can obtain, with this type of electrode, 30 micron electrode, with this type of loading, about 100 C rate, which means that we have a system that is very powerful. So, again, I think moving to this kind of closed system opens new opportunity for fast charging devices. And of course, through this work, we also open the routes to new type of chemistry, new type of phase, as clearly indicated here. And here, you can implement this to lithium oxide. We can really do the same thing with beta lithium 2IO3. This is the work that we are presently doing now, where we can also get the protonate phase, and so on and so on. So you can get a multitude of new materials in which you have plenty of opportunities. So this is more or less what I want to tell you about the fundamental study of this process. And of course now time has come to see more or less what are really the practicality of these lithium-rich materials. Indeed, we built a large amount of hope into these materials based on the fact that we have a specific energy of 1,000 watt-hours per kilogram. But this is not the only figure of merit. And you are going to see that we have a serious practical roadblocks. As I mentioned to you, first, the voltage phase. We have also issue of kinetics and issue of hysteresis. The voltage phase, as I show you, we are able to mitigate this voltage fade by using this kind of substitution, ruthenium by tin. And indeed, we have two samples here. When you replace by tin, we have limited voltage fade. When we have titanium, we have a huge voltage fade. And this again, we have two types of systems to really understand the origin of this voltage fade. And when you look at this by microscopy, and you can see that after 100 cycles, lithium ruthenium tin, everything remains clean on the discharge state. If you take the same compound with titanium, as clearly indicated here, look what is happening here. You have nearly the same row, and here you see this kind of white spot, which correspond nearly to the tetrahedral size and the structure. So what is happening here, when you have titanium, look here, when nearly you are removing lithium from the structure, titanium is migrating from the metal layer to the van der Waals layer, and since titanium is relatively small, it gets trapped into this nearly tetrahedral size. And this explains why we have this kind of voltage fade. Since we understand the origin, we are able, we'll see later, to propose a solution. Then, if I turn to the kinetics, here we are going to see the issue. And I think this is a very important issue to model materials, but also to lithium-rich NMC. Indeed, what you are looking at, you are looking at here at a cyclophotometric curve, where you can see nicely the peak associated to the cationic and the peak associated to the anionic. Look here, at T over 10, you have the black curve. Now, if I increase, in this case, or decrease, my rate, as you can see here, you have a peak that is moving here. So you can see, when I increase the rate, the cationic peak doesn't change, but the ionic peak is moving to lower potential, which means that in this case, the kinetics is nearly very poor. And we can nearly understand this, we have done this, you can deconvolute these two systems, and you can see nearly that you have no, I will say, hysteresis regarding the cationic redox couple, while you have hysteresis looking at the ionic redox couple. And of course, this ionic redox show very sluggish kinetics and trigger hysteresis, which results in poor round-trip energy efficiency and heating and so on. So this is really one of the main issues of the materials that also are identical for a lithium-rich NMC. Now the question, can we overpass this issue? We can do it by chemical means. As I mentioned to you, in this case, use bigger substitution elements to not be trapped. We can also play with material engineering. And also, people in the battery business claim that this voltage fade is not the main issue because they really can take care of it by BMS. But the most important issue is the hysteresis. And nowadays, we have not solved this problem. We have some kind of routes that we are looking we try to design compounds in which both cationic and anionic species will occur at the same potential, so that we can use daily this cationic as a kind of supercap behavior to mitigate the anionic limitation. So I think hope must prevail, but time to maturation will be essential for practical issues. And I think we are going to see that when we start this research, or people started research 5 years ago, a large amount of hope was placed into the materials. And with time, as you can see on this slide, where I compare in this spider plot this lithium NMC, where people have been moving from SEC22 to 811. This is this compound indicated here, and with lithium-rich NMC. And you can see now this lithium-rich NMC presents some advantage in terms of specific energy. They are kind of, I will say, relatively similar in terms of energy density, in terms of abundances of elements, more or less the same. But look, in terms of cyclicity and power density and energy efficiency, in this case, the lithium-rich NMC cannot compete with the NMC 811. So, bottom line here, the window of opportunity that this material were offering 5 to 10 years ago is closing very rapidly, and will even disappear if we don't succeed in finding the solution to this kind of voltage fade and hysteresis that I mentioned to you. So this, more or less, will conclude this first part, in which I told you more or less what was the advantage of this paradigm, and what I want to show you now, that it has some advantage also behind lithium ion. Because you can see here, we can also have quite some advantages for water splitting, because now we can design materials in which we can monitor the amount of peroxolite species, and this is quite interesting for oxygen evolution reaction and for water splitting. And we can also really design the same type of materials for sodium-ion battery or sodium technology, as we are going to see next. So now, I would like to switch to the second part of this talk, in which I am going to show you again how, from fundamental, we arrive really to a practical product in sodium-ion technology. And you are going to see the philosophy is always the same, understanding the fundamentals, and then implementing to the devices. So, when we move to sodium ion, of course, everyone knows the issue related to the reserve of lithium. And in this case, this will lead to technology that theoretically should be lower cost. But of course, to do this, we need to develop this kind of sodium-ion batteries based on the fact that lithium is smaller than sodium. So you need to take into account of size factor that we may influence the diffusion and so on. So owing to this demand and to this increasing demand for sustainability, over the last 5 to 10 years, a great amount or a huge amount of work has been done in trying to identify positive electrodes for the sodium-ion batteries. And here you are looking at the research that has happened over 30 years, where you can see only a few amount of compounds, and over the last 5 years, as you can see here, a huge amount of family of materials have appeared. And the good news is that we are finding exactly the same amount of materials. Remember, I start this talk with polyanic compound and higher compounds. We have exactly the same class of compounds with the sodium-ion technology. We use carbons. Carbons are also good really for this technology. So, the one white, I will say, here again, two schools have been developing. One school has been developing batteries based on polyanic compounds, and the other one, battery based on layer compounds. Of course, we have selected to develop polyanic compounds, since in this case, at least presently, they show better performances. So the system that we have been developing, as a matter of fact, is based on this compound, sodium 3 V2PO4, 2 times F3, and carbon. So we focus into these systems, which voltage composition curve is clearly indicated here, with this kind of two plateaux, about 3.6 and 4.2 volt, and we use in this case carbon as a negative electrode. And when you try to assign this cell as a coin cell, this is more or less a typical voltage composition curve that you obtain. cell potential as function of capacity, average voltage of 3.6 volt. But when you make this kind of coin cell, you here note that you have a huge irreversible capacity between the first charge and the first discharge. So which means through the process, you are losing about 25% of sodium into the system. So automatically, you could not really commercialize these materials. You need to find a solution. And the solution that we found, that we propose, which is based on what we have done in the past with lithium-ion system, is to use extra sodium. Extra sodium, which means in this case, we want to build this compound, sodium 3 plus X, because you can bring sodium without adding too much heavy weight into the materials. So to do this, we are obliged to prepare this phase, and it was done by Biao, as a matter of fact, which is here, by ball milling, who was able in this case, by mixing the NdPf with sodium metal, as clearly indicated here, and he was obtaining a very nice powder of sodium 3 plus X composition. We could, in this case, solve the structure, and this compound, again, was never reported before, and we are going to be using materials for nearly our positive electrode. And what is interesting for people who have been working on this kind of reaction, I will say, trying to ball mill something with sodium was not obvious at all. And surprisingly, this stuff works. And why it did work? Because what happened is due to the huge chemical reactivity of sodium with a powder. So it means when you put sodium in contact with powder, you form this kind of shell, and then you continuously run this shell to get this kind of very highly divided particles. So now, again, this type of phase, we could then prepare some batteries. And this is more or less, you have the data from the classical Na3B2PO4 2x F3. Now, when we use the trick of adding sodium, you can see, now when we charge this stuff, we remove this 3.5 sodium that are used to compensate for the irreversible capacities I mentioned to you before. And the result is indicated here. You increase the cell capacity by 15%. So, having done this stuff, we then really try to move and try to benchmark this type of cell in 18650. And it was done in collaboration with the French CA, where you can see the electrode of the material, and that's in here, you can see the first prototype that has been assembled in terms of sodium ion cell. And when we look at the systems, we are very satisfied with the cyclability, since we are able to obtain the first prototype about 4,000 cycles. And also, not expected, was the power rate capability, where we can see here, on charge and discharge, we can, and discharge, get 80% of the capacity at about 100 C. And this, maybe it can sound, looks counterintuitive, since sodium is bigger than lithium, but you need to realize that you have channels, you have oxygen around it. Since the charge is delocalized on sodium, the sodium will move faster than lithium. So everything was good, except that we tried to nearly to go to high temperature. And we went to high temperature. You can see here some cycling, some cell discharge, and so on. It was a total disaster. So it means, here again, we were obliged to go back to fundamentals and try to understand more or less what was the origin of this capacity decay and of this kind of worse performance. And here again, I try to show you the systematic when you are doing research which is related to application. You need to go back and forth between fundamental and applications. So we went back to application and try to understand. So first, we try to determine what were these parasitic reactions in the battery system. So what we have done here, we developed some operando UV spectroscopy, where you can see we have the cell, here we charge it, and we use the DMC, by the way. I forgot to tell you that our electrolyte was a mixture of EC and DMC. So we tried to go back to the electrolyte and to sort out what's the problem by separating each electrolyte. So we look here at this linear carbonate, and you can see here, as soon as we go to the high plateau here, which means that here you are on the negative reducing of the carbon, we obtain, or we see that there definitively we were releasing parasitic reactions. We look at the same experiment with ethyl carbonate. Here, the good news, nothing was happening. So it looks like the problem was coming from this linear carbonate. So, in this case, we decide to go one step further and try to see now what was or the activity or electrochemical activity of this release species. So to do this, we designed this kind of 5-electrode cells, where in this case, you are going to cycle the cell in a galvanostatic way between these two electrodes, WE1 and C1, and now you are going to collect cyclovoltammogram between these two platinum plates and platinum mesh. So we did this stuff again for EC. In the case of EC, as you can see, there is not too much activity. The curves are featureless. While now, when we move to DMC, look here. We started, fine, suddenly, these two peaks pop out. Increase, and then decrease later. So it means now that we are generating species that can be oxidized. So this is quite interesting, because this indicates that we have a reduction of DMC as a carbon electrode, and this release species which can be oxidized. Now, of course, the question is, what are these species, and what is the origin of these species? So here, we go back to what the same systematic that we have been using 15 years ago on lithium ion, and we know from the work of Orbach and others that the carbonate decomposes and this kind of lithium methyl carbonate and so on. So the question was, or we hypothesized at least, that similar reaction could happen in sodium-ion batteries. So to do this, we are obliged really to kind of synthesize these model compounds to use them as a reference. So we went back to organic synthesis, and we prepare this ethyl alkyl carbonate by the reaction indicated here, when you react sodium metal with methyl alcohol to get this metalonate and so on. So we prepare this type of compound, and then now we have our reference to check the signature, both cyclovoltammetric as well as by UV. And when we do so, this is more or less what we observe. And the top here, remember, is the cyclovoltammogram that we collect SE2 and C1 DMC that I showed you before. And now, this is our reference compound. Look here, I have nearly the sodium alkyl oxide. Look the peak here. Bingo. Perfectly at the same position. That's what we observe in our experiment. Now, if I look nearly at the alkyl carbonate, here again, methyl alkyl carbonate, it corresponds to the peak at 3.93. So this nearly indicates that we obtain this type of species. We could also then explain this, or explain the peaks that we have, the absorbance peaks that we have in our UV visible spectra, which means that in this case, we have nearly a decomposition of DMC into these two surface species according to the reaction mechanism. So now, we know what is happening into these cells, which means that when we are nearly in this kind of EC DMC based electrolyte, the EC is safe, the DMC is a disaster, because in this case, it's going to be reduced as a carbon electrode to create an SCI, but which, in contrast to the lithium ion, this SCI is not stable, but it's going to dissolve, it's going to release species, and these species, nearly, are going to be oxidized at the positive electrode. So this is really the problem that we have. So knowing this, of course, now we are able to go back and to design the right electrolyte by putting different additives. And this is more or less the work that has been done. Of course, I will not tell you what this new electrolyte formulation is, but as you can see now, we can go nearly to 55 degrees C. You can see here 20 cycles at 55 degrees C. You see perfectly cycling, and you can see here after 1 week of storage and so on. So this is more or less the type of work that I've been achieving, and all this stuff has led to the creation of a company by the name of Tiamat in order to develop and commercialize this sodium-ion cell. Of course, as you can see here, we are not competing with lithium-ion in terms of energy density yet, because we are still low. And remember, when lithium-ion was put on the market in 1990, it was about 110 watt-hours per kilogram. So of course, our research today focuses in increasing this type of capacity And this is more or less what we are working on, where we are going back to layer compounds and try to improve this daily capacity. And the several directions that we are flowing up, we try to play the game of ball milling, as I mentioned to you, for the polyanic compound. But we try daily to do some substitution, and there you have a compound we recently synthesized, but there, unfortunately, the capacity is still about 120 milliampere per gram. We play with, again, the ionic redox, and there you have this phase. Here you have better capacity, but unfortunately you use iridium, which is useless. And then we also play with fluorine in order really to get this different type of surface. So this is more or less what we have been doing. So at this time, I think I should conclude. And I hope that I convince you that battery research is an exciting field with numerous opportunities. Doesn't matter we are good in physics, chemistry, and so on. We need people from all this field. I show you nearly that working on materials, and what is very important is working on materials that were broadly used today. We were able to go back to fundamental and come out with new concepts. Then I show you more or less how, by triggering the chemistry and the electrolyte, we are able to make the sodium-ion technology a reality. Also, through this presentation, I show you how important analytical techniques are. Because it is we are able to see this kind of dimer by high resolution electron microscopy that we were able to come out with the mechanism that we propose. And of course, what will be nice in the future, and people trying to push the frontier of the analytical technique, it will be nice if we could really have an operando technique which enables us to look at the electrons during the reaction. Because, as you know, all the energy-related concepts dealing with either electrochromics, dealing with photovoltaics, dealing with water splitting, are always based on redox reaction. So I think if we could really spot the electrons, this could be a revolution in electrochemistry, the same revolution that we had in material science when the microscopy came out. And with this, again, if I have my last message, my last comment, the benefit of solving fundamental scientific problems emerging from concrete technology challenge is definitively the way to go. With this, I would like to thank you all, and of course, thanks all my colleagues at the College of France, and you for your attention.
So now let's open floor to the audience. Any questions? We have plenty of time, about 50 minutes for the question. Anyone wants to start? Okay. Have the student to start.
The student start. It challenges the professor.
Always. So thank you for your presentation. So I have a question regarding the rate capability of sodium cells compared with lithium samples. That you mentioned that sometimes sodium-based materials have superior rate capability compared with lithium. You explain it by using the delocalized charge density of the bulky cation of sodium compared with lithium. So my question is, can this statement be generalized to other, like potassium or other even magnesium or, other cations? Or are there any limitations?
Well, it can be generalized to potassium, because I think the early data from Canon, I think, that he mentioned it, on potassium show also very outstanding rate capability. Now you mentioned magnesium. Magnesium is really different, because magnesium, now you put 2, is magnesium plus 2. Now you again increase the charge localization. So I think, you have potassium, you will increase, magnesium will decrease, because you double the charge on the magnesium. But I think this rule is relatively general, because it's more or less an interaction between two charges, oxygen minus and the cation that is plus.
So how about salvation energy?
I think the salvation energy is an issue, but it's an issue not for the diffusion, because when you have an intercalation, you have, of course, as you're right, the solvitation and disorientation barrier. And I think now this is controlling. Then when you go into the compound, let's assume that you take a compound you could diffuse with that solvitation energy, all the rules that I'm telling you will work. Okay? But you're obliged to take the solvitation energy to know this energetic barrier. And it was more or less in the case of magnesium. It is more or less a solvate cations, means that the magnesium plus all the shell that can move faster than pure magnesium.
Okay, thank you.
Will you ask a second? Okay.
Just out of the curiosity about the oxygen anions redox behavior, when you're talking about the instability and the release of oxygen gas, do you think there's a impact from, say, the nucleation energy of the new gas phase at the interface, or you think this will be insignificant compared to the other activation processes for the oxygen release?
When you remove oxygen, when you have this kind of oxygen release, I think really is what happening is you have, in this case, creating a radical. And the oxygen radical within the structure is relatively unstable. So I think the oxygen radicals try to decorrelate it from the structure to recombine into oxygen gas. And why we think here, what is the energy to do this, I don't know it. But why I think this stuff is right is because if you look here now with different types of chalcogens, you take sulfur. Sulfur, the chemical hardness of sulfur is less than the one of oxygen. This is why in this case you can remove electron and you can nearly in this case a pure S2 2- diamond. And you can, and the same if you apply to selenium, it's the same thing. Now considering the energy, I don't know about it.
Another question, it could be a naive question, but as you've been talking about the anion redox and you've been actually mixing different cations in the matrix, do you think there's a possibility there's some kind of magic anion that can occupy the same position as oxygen, and then have you design a mixed or more like a polyanion or mixed anion layered compound to explore that kind of compound's redox behavior? Basically trying to dilute down the amount of oxygen in your lattice so that the evolution of the oxygen gas or the chance of two oxygen anions meeting each other, peroxide anions meeting each other will be lower.
No, I personally don't think that more or less, I can't imagine, I can't imagine that the cation is, oxygen is going to take the side of the cation. You are talking about interside mixing between ion and cation. If you have this stuff, you see, yeah, it's a total. I don't think so. I haven't thought about this stuff, but I think it's quite unlikely.
I just like to ask a probably very naive question from a non-expert. So when I look at all the material that you have used, there's ruthenium, rubidium, iridium, niobium, manganese, iron, on and on. So how do you optimize the materials? I mean, how do you end up selecting from your material set or to optimize your battery? I mean, there's many issues in battery, as you said. I mean, and safety is one of the big issues as well. I mean, optimizing this from a material point of view when you have such a complex systems, how you go around doing your research?
So I think it's a good point you take it. Okay, so I think again, when you want to come out with, like in this case, what is very important is model compound to understand more or less the fundamentals of these processes and so on. Which is why more or less we use ruthenium, we use iridium, but we learned quite a lot, but they are totally useless for practical applications. So we use this kind of compounds and then try to come back and to modify lithium-rich NMC with this new knowledge. But the rule of thumb, if you want to get the material for batteries, it has to have very cheap elements. So 3D metals means iron, manganese. Which is why in the case of sodium, we go back to iron, manganese. Now, once you have your compound, you are, I would say, only 25% of the way to the product. Because what becomes more important is the compatibility of this compound with electrolyte. And you need to have more or less both reaction of the positive, reaction of the negative, to proceed in tandem without parasitic reactions. And you can see, for instance, in the case of sodium, where we are very happy to get good performance at room temperature, it turned out to be a disaster. So here you need to go back really to the lab and design interface. And here I say, I can make a comment, maybe it's a risky comment, but in the future, on battery research, solving interface is going to be quite more important than designing new materials. Because even if you look through history, I started with lithium cobalt oxide. 25 years ago, I end up with lithium cobalt oxide modified 25 years after. Which means that we have prepared, even in our group, let's be honest, we have prepared 100 new materials. None of them make to the market. So it is very difficult really to bring a compound to the market and compete to what we have today. And I think in the future, for the reliability of the device and so on, what is going to be essential is mastering interface, and I think electrochemistry is going to be a science more important than it has been in the past. Understanding what's going on is my personal feeling.
So in the sense that once the technology becomes mature, you get back to the same simple systems, just like silicon, for instance.
Yes, because I think, let's be honest, I think lithium-ion today is quite simple. We master it. The classical lithium and MC and carbon and so on is well mastered. And I think you can still improve in terms of reliability, because people want 10 years instead of 7 years and so on. But the system, we know it very well, which is on why, again, it's a huge amount of research going on, people moving to aqueous system and so on. Even ourselves, it's fine, we have fun. It's illegal, but it's really, practically speaking, it's useless. Because nowadays, you need to realize that what is a business? When you look at Elon Musk telling you that more or less in 2050 or 2025, sorry, the price of the kilowatt hour store of energy will be $100 per kilowatt hour. None of whatever technology, redox flow or whatever, will compete with it. You don't know more or less if you really look at business driven. But again, I think doing all the kind of electrochemistry that we are doing and so on is important, because we learn still more about the science, and we can implement it at a later stage to still improve lithium-ion. But I don't have too much hope, and other technology coming out that are going to really replace lithium-ion. Even sodium-ion that I mentioned here is a technology that is for mass storage. You will never store sodium-ion in EV or in your portable, because you don't have enough energy density. But since and mass storage volume is not an issue, sodium-ion can go because it's cheap.
The oxo anion can participate in a catalytic process in either intercalation or oxo-peroxo redox. So how do you differentiate these two different processes? Oxo intercalation to the electrode can also account for some of the cathotic processes, right? But that is not anotic redox. That is still metal-based redox. Oxo intercalation.
Yeah, but oxo, again, here we are considering as an intercalation, more or less as a redox couple that is kind of assisting the uptake and release of lithium. In your case, you are really talking about this kind of oxo going in and out.
Yeah, that's right. No.
I don't know. Why do you think? You have an example?
Yes. There are
okay,
many
great.
reported examples of oxo intercalation into the process in which the oxo itself does not undergo redox. It is still metal-centered redox, but oxo intercalated and deincalated, just like lithium incalated and deincalated, but in this case it's anion intercalated and deincalated instead of cation.
Okay. Which one? But which kind of?
Well, in the early 90s, there are many reports on oxo intercalation, deintercalation processes. Okay. But right now on lithium-ion battery, it's lithium intercalation. It's cation-based. But anion-based intercalation has been reported 20-25 years ago. So my question is how to differentiate the oxo intercalation process, which is non-anion redox, and oxo-peroxo, that is anion redox processes. The reason I'm asking this question is the strongest evidence for oxo-peroxo redox seems from the EXAFS X-ray study, which came out of the fitting. The distance between oxo and oxo distance from the fitted data appear to be quite long compared to peroxo distance.
Okay.
In peroxo, the oxo-oxo distance is less than 1.5.
Yeah, right.
But in the data you reported, it's quite long. It's 1.8 or something like that.
Yeah, but there we are even at 2.3.
So my question is, experimentally, how people differentiate a classical phenomenon, which is anion intercalation and deintercalation, with this new phenomenon you stressed, that is anion redox-based process.
Yeah. But again, it's a good point, and I have to. I should confess that I don't know this paper. I should look into it.
Oh yeah, there are quite many.
Yes, but I should not yet. But it's a good point. But I think more or less by microscopy, for instance.
So again, from your microscopy imaging and X-ray absorption, how do you comment on this unusual long distance between oxo and oxo in your peroxo species? In the typical peroxide, the OO distance is roughly 1.5 angstrom, but in the fetid data, it's much longer than that. So how do you?
Okay. Again, we call this this kind of peroxo participation is linked to the distortion of this octahedron, and we have this distortion, but we are really far from the classical imperfect right 1.5. So we can calculate, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's a fetid data.
Yes, we can calculate more or less because we say O2 n minus, and we can calculate the value of n from this kind of XPS data and so on. And we arrive at the value of n over 2.75 or 2 or 3.
Yes, very wrong.
Yes. But I think the question, I need to look into this stuff. I don't know what it is. I need to look into it.
Okay, any more questions? Yes?
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful talk. Sir, I have one question. For your lithium, ruthenium, tin oxide material, you have shown that the voltage hysteresis, which you are mentioning about, that has been solved to a great extent. But when you replace that, when you replace the titanium with tin, then the voltage hysteresis got reduced. So what is the reason that titanium, in case of titanium, there was large hysteresis, and for tin, there is low?
I think the reason here we ascribe it simply in terms of nearly size. And as I showed the picture, when you take titanium, we can see, remember the picture as I showed, where I have nearly these two spots, we have nearly migration. Because remember, when we have this kind of oxygen activity on charge, we have migration of the cations. So the cation move from the van der Waals gap to the metal layers. And when they move here, within the path, they go nearly to a tetrahedral size. And what we have shown is that when you have a small cation, like titanium compared to tin, it can get trapped into this site. And this is more or less what happened in the case of manganese, which is even smaller, it gets trapped. And here, we have also this kind of transition, what people call a spinel-like layer. And I think more or less this is the reason why. So of course, when we found this stuff, we said, great, we solved the issue. And we went back to lithium-rich NMC. And we tried in this case to substitute with tin. Unfortunately, we couldn't make the phase. We were able to substitute like manganese manganese 0.27, tin 0.25. We could never replace fully manganese by tin. But it was more or less what we have been trying, and we failed.
Yeah, let's have one last question. Yes?
Thank you, Professor, for your nice talk. I'm going to know your opinion about this material you develop, the ionic redox activity, about the lithium or sodium oxygen batteries. Also your actually general opinion about the future of these two batteries, oxygen batteries.
Oh, what is the future of the metal air batteries? Okay, I think, of course, lithium air has generated a large amount of excitement. I think a waste of a large amount of energy, a lot of groups working on it. And I think, again, nothing has been achieved in terms of practicability, to my knowledge. We learned quite a lot, but again, the electrochemistry. We learned a lot about redox mediator and so on. This was great. But I don't think that you will ever have a practical lithium air battery, ever. So let's be straight. Now, talk about sodium air batteries. Even worse, because we have been working on this system. So I have a PhD that finished about 2 months ago. And again, problematics are even worse for even less energy density. So I don't think that neither lithium or sodium metal air battery will make it. Now, if you look at other metal air battery, I think Zenker, I think by now seeing that there is a kind of progress, interesting progress on zinc air batteries. And people seem so clever, they have solved the issue of dendrites as a negative electrode. And I saw some data. Now, will it make it? And then, of course, and so on, I don't know. But I think metal air battery can be, it's certainly the one that I cannot say will not make it. But lithium and sodium, I don't know, but from my point of view, forget it.
Okay, so with that, I think we have to finish the lecture now. Professor Tarascon will be available during the coffee break. And let's thank Professor Tarascon again for the very nice talk.